Welcome to our seminar today. Bear with us a little bit if you could. We are trying new technology that we're quite excited with, and we're juggling it somewhat. For the first time ever, we are setting up a live multi-webcam conference that is bridging quite a ways in the world. We're going to have an Asheville contingency, a New England, I forget if Linda's in Boston or Rhode Island, as well as two web cameras set up in Zurich, Switzerland. And we'll be having different presenters at different time and do different aspects of it. My name is Steve Buser. I'm one of the founders of the Asheville Young Center, and we are going to be broadcasting today from the Asheville Young Center, partly. And I'm going to give just a brief introduction on the technology and how we're going to be handling today. Also included today are Murray Stein, who will be doing our introduction and overview, Lucienne Margaret, one of the presenters, and Linda Carter, also a presenter. This is the 32nd event that we've had in our video seminar series. Up till now, these video seminars have been hosted at the University of North Carolina, Asheville, and we've used the university systems to hub them out. We are changing that format a little bit, mostly to allow us to have an evening and a Saturday afternoon kind of format with that. And we've had a lot of feedback. People like the Saturday or evening presentations, so that's why today has a different feel to it to some degree. We will have an audio, video, and PowerPoint presentations through the day, and people will be able to ask questions from any computer. You can use a chat feature. You can also turn on the webcams, and that's a little tricky, but we may try that today as well and see if people want to communicate with us through the webcam. We are delighted to say that we have a dozen countries joining us. They include Israel, New Zealand, Malaysia, Canada, Australia, Spain, Japan, France, Brazil, Mexico, Switzerland, and of course the US. A couple of things. Hopefully everybody at home has figured this out already. If you haven't, now is the time. Make sure that you've selected the correct audio setting. On the software that you've been using, there is a button under the audio tab, and you have two choices: using the microphone and speaker of your computer or calling in via telephone. If you call in by telephone, it's a little more complicated, although the directions will be there on the computer. If you had microphone and speaker, you'll hear the entire broadcast through your computer speakers. Of course, make sure you know where your volume is on your computer so you can turn that up and down. There might be multiple volumes, including actual dials to turn, as well as the system audio setting. But hopefully you know your computers well enough for those pieces. You may want to explore some of the features while you're with us today. There's a full screen mode you may want to click. You can enlarge the presenter's video or the presentation slides by dragging it with a slider on your computer. There's a raise your hand button where if you want to ask a question, not so much a technical question, but if you want to have us open up your webcam when we come to that point, click the raise your hand question, and if we have time, we'll try to do some of that today as well. And you can type in ask a question as well, and we'll be monitoring those today also. Today is our Saturdays with the Zurich series that we're just beginning. We are now able to broadcast video on nights and weekends, today being a weekend, obviously. The Thursday mornings, which is what we were doing, at least Eastern US time, was difficult for people. If you worked a normal job, you had a hard time perhaps joining us live. So we're trying to move the Zurich ones to Saturday midday, at least Eastern time with that. So the new model that we're working with are Saturdays, noon to 1:30, so about a 90-minute time frame. That's Eastern US time zone. I say 90 minutes. Today will be 120 minutes, 2 hours, and that's because there's two main presenters today. So we added a little bit of time, but we're trying to shorten them. We've been doing 3-hour broadcasts, and people seem to like the 90 to 120-minute format better. So that's what we're trying today. Our next seminar, we're very excited to announce in September 21st. Again, it'll be that Saturday, midday, noon to 1:30 Eastern US time. And John Hill, as well as Murray Stein, Murray will be doing an introduction, and John Hill will be doing a 90-minute seminar on the psychological issues on the afterlife. That's not the full title, but it'll be something on a Jungian perspective of life after death, which I'm quite excited to participate in. Otherwise, we are required to announce that we have no commercial support for the presenters, topics, or programs. There's no pharmaceutical industry support of any kind associated today. We will have an online survey, which you'll be sent afterwards. There will also be continuing education credits available. That's a separate registration that many of you have already done. And if you registered for that, you will get a link to take a quick test on exams to show that you listened to it today, and then you can download your CE certificate afterwards. A couple of warnings about recording. We are taping today. If you would like to remain anonymous with your questions, please email them to us. And that's the general email address that most people have. It's info@ashevilleyoungcenter.org, and that's the same one that you've been receiving emails from us all along. If you open your microphone and or camera when we invite you to do so, it will be recorded on the video, so don't open up your webcam if you don't want to, or if you're not dressed appropriately. Please note that comments or questions in the chat box will be visible on the recorded video as well. So just be cautious with that if you don't want that recorded. We have 3 presenters today. Murray will actually be doing the introductions themselves, but here are the 3 images. We have Murray Stein, Linda Carter, Lucienne Margaret, and I'll introduce Murray since he'll be the first, and then Murray will do the formal introductions for the next 2. Murray Stein, most of you know, he has done the majority of our seminars to date, often as a host or introduction, sometimes as the primary presenter. Murray is a supervising training analyst and former president of the International School of Analytical Psychology, known as ISAP, Zurich. He's the author of many, many books, including Principles of Individuation, as well as a nice overview of Jungian analysis in another book. From 2001 to 2004, he was president of the International Association of Analytical Psychology. That's the main Jungian organizing community. He has lectured internationally and presently lives in Switzerland. So without further ado, Murray, go ahead and open your webcam. I will close mine in a moment. I'll take down the slides, and Murray will do a brief overview and introduction of our presenter. So Murray, I will turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to mute myself. We can hear you just fine. Speak up a little bit if you're able, but you are coming across loud and clear. So it's all yours, Murray.
Can you remove the slide?
Yes. I thought I did. Oh, I'm sorry. Is it gone now?
Yeah, it's gone.
Okay. We're trying to figure this out ourselves today. Okay, I will turn off my webcam, and it's all yours.
So this is a seminar that we've been working and planning for quite a long time with 2 distinguished guests, Lucienne Margaret and Linda Carter, who will be the major presenters. I'm just going to do a short introduction to get us going and give you some kind of general overview on the Jungian approach to art, psychology and art, we call this program. And let me begin by just telling you, in case you didn't know it, that Jung's, one of his major works of art, the Red Book, is now on display at a major art exhibition in Venice. It's called the Venice Biennale. And it takes place every 2 years in Venice. And this year, the curator, young Italian man, curator for the Biennale, had an interest in Jung and what he's trying to research and think about and reflect on the sources of art. Where does art come from? The general view is that art comes from traditions, from basically our conscious world, whether collective consciousness or individual consciousness, that the artist is someone who looks around and is inspired by other artists or the artistic tradition and works from that. And this curator's idea is a Jungian idea, Jung's idea, that is that art, the source of art is actually not in consciousness, that the wellspring for art is in the unconscious. that there is a kind of instinct for art, if you will. And I want to say a few words about that as by way of introduction. Now, by being shown at the Biennale, Jung is being recognized as an artist. In fact, a world-class artist and a very important artist, deserving the attention of people who are coming to look at art. And I'm not sure that he would be so happy with this, because he didn't want to be known as an artist. He denied many times that he was an artist or that what he was making was art. He felt it was a kind of temptation away from his fundamental profession, which was a physician and a psychological theorist, a psychoanalyst. And for Jung, making his art, as he does in the Red Book, with great success now since the book has been published, he really did for himself. He wasn't working as an artist out of an artistic tradition in order to show his paintings and his works to other people. He was doing it for a different reason. And he felt that art belongs to the world of aesthetics, that art is created not necessarily for beauty, but for appreciation, for being simply taken on its own terms, looked at, taken in, absorbed, whatever. But he wanted to look at art, his own art, and at other art with another perspective, not only aesthetically, but also what he names as ethically, which isn't exactly a good word. Let's say with a view toward individuation possibilities. And so that he was making his art not for the purpose of aesthetics or to show other people or to appreciate it as art, but to use it to promote a process in himself that he called the individuation process. So for him, as a man who made art, actually, and this wasn't the only piece of art that he made, the Red Book, he painted other pictures, he made sculptures, he carved in stone, he built a house, a couple of houses. He was very busy with what one could call works of art, but they were done for other reasons, and he would interpret them with an eye toward psychological meaning. What does the work mean psychologically? What is it telling me about my unconscious, about my unconscious process? So art was meant to serve individuation for Jung, and not the other way around, that the artist lives for art. Here art lives for the artist, or the maker of the art, and is a means for bringing to life images and experiences that otherwise wouldn't see the light of day as clearly, and bringing them out so that he could reflect on them and work with them in his own inner work toward individuation. So Jung did not want to consider himself an artist, even though he made works of art. He was using art for another purpose. Now, there is a Jungian theory of art in general, and in a nutshell, it states that art makes the artist, not the other way around. The artist doesn't make the art makes the artist. And the idea there is that the impulse toward making art fundamentally resides in an instinctual base. That artists make art because they have to. It isn't a choice. They make art because art demands them to bring it out, to let it see the light of day. So it's as though the artwork exists in the unconscious and clamors for expression, and the artist is somebody who's tuned in to it and has the means, the ability, the talent to pick up a brush or a pen and let it see the light of day. So it's as though there's a call from art to the artist, bring me out, let me see the light of day. And Jung saw this as having taken place since time immemorial, since people painted in caves, cave paintings, famous cave paintings in France, or on rocks, made trinkets, made jewelry, built houses that were more than just the necessities. And Jung's theory was that the human being is endowed for some reason, it's a mystery, with a surplus of libido, a surplus of psychic energy, more than we need just to survive. And there's a pressure to do something with this surplus. How are you going to spend the surplus? And this creates demands that we do things that are extraordinary, that aren't necessary for sheer survival. That we build beautiful houses, that we build grandiose palaces, that we build temples and churches, that we paint beautiful pictures and ugly pictures and whatever the unconscious wants to show. But this surplus is like a pressure on the human being to create culture. We create culture because it's in our nature to create culture. We must create culture. And every human group that has ever lasted for any period of time on the face of the earth has made something cultural, whether they're masks or totem poles or cave paintings or Mona Lisas or whatever. And this comes out of an internal pressure to spend this surplus on something. And the artist has a channel for it. If it's a writer, the channel is the word. If it's a painter, the channel is color and canvas. And of course, culture provides the means and the traditions so that this can be channeled masterfully by people with enormous talent for putting that surplus libido to work. And so the artist, when the artist is done with his work, he's done. If you ask the artist, what does it mean? He'll say, it means whatever you want it to mean. I'm done with it. I've painted it. I've written it. You interpret it. He's done with it because for him, the job is done when it is expressed. For Jung, the psychologist, the job isn't done until it's understood. And so Jung is operating on another level with interpretation, to look at the art as a symbolic expression of the unconscious and to ask the question, what does it mean? What does it mean for me, the artist who's produced it, or what does it mean for the culture in which it has been produced? And this question, what does it mean, brings us to the understanding of symbol, that for Jung, the art is a symbol. It's a symbolic expression of something unconscious, striving for the light of day, striving to come into being, and to see it as a symbol means to relate to it differently than you would as an aesthetic object. A symbol carries mystery and meaning, and it speaks to you. It says something to you. It goes into you in a different way than simply saying that's a pretty picture. You can walk through an art gallery, see many pretty pictures. You stand at one that really grabs you. You take it in, and it begins to speak to you, and you begin living with that work of art. It takes on a symbolic meaning for you. Now, if you really live the work of art, as some people do with art, with poetry, Shakespeare, for example, those works of art transform you. They change your life. It can be a film, it can be a painting, it can be a novel, it can be a poem. But if you take it in as a symbol, it changes you. Okay, so it can advance your individuation process. You don't have to be the artist who creates it, but if you take it in as a symbol and use it as a symbolic object for yourself and live with it as a symbol, then it will also advance your individuation process. And one of the lectures this afternoon is going to speak about that. Linda Carter is going to pick up that very topic to show how a work of art painted by somebody else has the capacity to transform a person in the therapeutic context. Now, Jungians have been writing about art, thinking about art, beginning with Jung, of course, but many people since then. And I just want to mention a couple of names. Erich Neumann, who wrote about Henry Moore, the archetypal world of Henry Moore. Rafael Lopez Pedraza, who wrote a wonderful book called Anselm Kiefer, The Psychology of Art After the Catastrophe. And Christian Gaillard, who has written as professor of at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, psychology of art, Le Musée Imaginaire de Carl Gustav Jung. These are important books. There are many books by Jungians on art and artists. So Jungians generally have taken a great interest in art. Besides that, there is a tradition in Jungian analysis of art making within the context of a Jungian practice. And this is a very well-established tradition, beginning with Jung and a patient of his, for example, that he wrote up in a classic paper called, I want to get it exactly right so you can look it up if you want to. A Study in the Process of Individuation. These are paintings by Christine Mann, who was a patient of Jung's in the 1920s and 30s. It's in volume 9.1 of the collected works. So in his own practice, Jung used art for a therapeutic process to advance individuation. And other Jungians have written about it. Lynn Cruz mentioned on the website recently this book by Penny Lewis, Creative Transformation, The Healing Power of the Arts. She's an art therapist and Jungian. And Mariana Tauber, The Soul's Ministrations. You can all see that, where she uses art for self-healing. And this use of art for therapeutic purposes is fundamental to many Jungian analyst practices. So again, it's very much a part. Art enters into the Jungian context, not only as a reflection on great works of art and artists, but as a practice, but with the caveat, don't call it art. Because if you call it art, the patient gets frozen. I can't make art. I'm not an artist. I can't do it. So it isn't for the purpose of creating art per se as an aesthetic object. It's for the purpose of expressing something that needs to be expressed from the unconscious. Sometimes it turns out to be real art because of a person's ability to bring out wonderful images or very meaningful images that also relate to other people and their life experience. For an excellent summary, and I will close with this, of Jung, everything that Jung said about art, I recommend this book, Jung on Art, by a Dutch scholar named Vandenberg, who has read everything that Jung wrote about art, has systematized it, and has produced a wonderful scholarly work on a Jungian theory of art and what Jung thought about art, how he reflected on it. So I recommend this book very highly. And another book that's very useful, written by contemporary Jungians, Psyche and the Arts, edited by Susan Rowland. So those are some books for your reference. That's my introduction to this seminar, and I think that will be sufficient for now to set the stage for two papers that are quite different. Now, Lucia and Margaret is going to do the first paper. She will take about 40 minutes, and then there will be a brief time for discussion after that. And then more time at the end of the seminar for discussion if you have something further to ask or a contribution you'd like to make. Lucia Margaret is a senior training and supervising analyst at ISAP in Zurich and has a special interest in creativity and the arts. And she has lectured about art and artists a number of times in various contexts here in Zurich at ISAP. And so I would now like to turn the camera and the microphone over to Lucian, who's sitting in her office in Zurich. Lucian?
Thank you so much, Murray. What a wonderful introduction. We really, really appreciate that. And excellent. So, Lucian, you're sharing your background, which is good. Murray, go ahead and turn off your webcam. So go ahead and click off. There you go. Perfect.
Yes. Am I?
Yep, you're on. You're loud and clear. You're great. When you do your slides, make sure to put it in slideshow mode so we see the maximal slides. But it's looking great.
Yeah.
We see your desktop right now.
Right.
Thank you. It's all yours.
Thank you. Oh, Jesus. Here.
Is it okay? You can pull around this because I'm not on camera.
That's perfect. That looks really good. That's a great.
Is it okay?
Yep, looks fabulous. You have it on slideshow. It looks nice and big. We have your video camera up. You are perfect. You're good to go.
Good. So I can take out my headset even.
Well, we may get feedback.
No.
We'll probably get.
Yeah.
Well, no, I guess
keep it on.
You can take it off only if you turn off your speakers. I would just leave it on just so we can communicate better with you.
It's
so
good.
You're good.
Yeah, it's no problem. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So my title is The Amazing Power of Art, Adolf Wölfli, an artist guided by his soul. You know, Jung, as Murray has explained, he would say of himself that the inner gates to his unconscious within his psyche, they were wide open. And this is not common to all people at all, but it is common to all artists and to the mentally ill as well. But then, whether the ego is strong enough to contain and organize the flow of all these unconscious contents streaming into consciousness, and to order that into structures, this decides on the creative ability of the person. Otherwise, the consciousness is just going to be flooded by the unconscious, which does happen when you get psychotic. For Jung, as for most people, this having your inner gates wide open is a gift of the gods, but also a curse, or it can be a curse. And for some great artists, it has turned to the worst, and they did go definitely insane to thinking of Van Gogh or Nietzsche or Hölderlin and many others. So for Jung, though, he found a way. He had once a very serious psychic crisis in 1913 after his break with Freud. And then he had enough resources himself to take recourse to invent things or means to help himself through this crisis. He started to play with stones and then started a totally new technique, dialoguing with his inner figures and his inner visions. He later on developed this technique and called it active imagination. This brought him that undoubtedly through this psychic crisis, which was quite threatening to him. Well, let me make the parentheses and say this for normal people who don't have this grace of inspirations from the unconscious like this. These people say, like you and me, they have another struggle. They struggle to widen the opening to the unconscious. And like when I practice intuitive painting, the big challenge is not to contain the stream of energy from the unconscious, but on the contrary, to control my many conscious fears, ambitions, and reasoning of all sorts, so as they won't close the door to the wellspring of my inspiration. That will be my struggle. So now, let's go back though to Jung and to Adolf Wölfli. He is the example I would like to take to explain why I'm talking about the amazing power of art. Adolf Wölfli is a Swiss. He belonged to those with these wide inner gates, but he could not control the doorway as well as Jung did. He was a schizophrenic and he never recovered. But what's the interesting part is that he did have enough ego strength to do creative work and to translate all these obsessions and inner torments into art forms. And he did all sorts of things. He did drawings and collage, he did writing, I did even compose music. And that was a ceaseless creative activity he had day after day, 7 days a week. And only this could bring him solace and relief. So before I show you his works, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the person so that you get to know him and understand maybe his pictures a little better. Adolf Wölfli, he was born in 1864, which is about 150 years ago, in Switzerland, in a rural area in Switzerland. He was the last of several children. His father was a stone cutter and an alcoholic. And when Adolf was 6, his father left the family, and he was left with his mother alone. For 2 years, his mother tried to make a living as a washerwoman, but it came out that she could not sustain the family, and the authorities intervened at that moment, where they knew they would have to support the family, support her and Adolf. And what they did is what used to happen in these days until recently in Switzerland. They would take the children, Adolf in this case, away from their parent and place them at farmers so that they would work as child laborer, if you would like, for their food and lodging. And that what happened to him. He was 8. And so he was separated from his mother, and that was certainly the first tragedy in his life. All the more as 1 year later, his mother died before him having been able to see her anymore. So he stayed at these farms until he was 15, until the school was over. His schooling was very poor. The farmer would let him always go to school. And then at 18, and then after 15, he was 15, he just worked as a farmhand and earned a little money, just minimal. At 18, he had a romance, a love story, an unhappy one with a girl. He wanted to marry her, and her parents were against this liaison, and they broke off for social reasons. And that was second blow in his life, certainly. And then at 24, again, it happened twice again in his life. At 24, he got to know 2 women he would have liked to marry, but they turned away from him, both of them. Then he took to alcohol, and he became a heavy drinker. That was no good for him. 2 years after that, at 26, he was caught twice at attempts at sexual assaults on 2 girls. The first one was 14, and the second one was 5, so it was really, really bad. He did it almost publicly, so he was caught every time. He was stopped every time. And after that, he was put 2 years. Let me show you him. Oh, happened here. This is Adolf Wölfli. So you see, at this moment, he's 56. So you can imagine a young man being like that muscular figure, a bear of a man. So it must have been quite frightening and terrifying for a little girl. What happened is that after his 2 years of prison, he didn't improve at all. His life went further astray. He was socially isolated. He was drinking. He was having fights with people. And at 31, they caught him again at an attempt at a sexual assault, this time on a girl of 3.5. So that was really enough. He was sent to the clinic Waldau, a psychiatric clinic, and they diagnosed him an irresponsible, dangerous schizophrenic. So, and that was the end of his social life. Now, in Waldau, he stayed until his death. He was an extremely difficult patient for the first years. He had acute psychotic states. Every single night, he would rave at his visions and voices. He was crazed with anguish. He was overwhelmed by his inner pressures. And he would, more than once, demolish his cell. He would attack guards and patients. So it was quite difficult. And then after some time seeing that, he gave up himself, working with the other patients, being with them. He refused to work on the farm of the clinic and insisted on being isolated, remaining in his cell all on his own. This was granted to him, and that was his way of living from then on, more or less almost completely isolated up to his death. Now, so he was a very bad bit of a patient, but 4 years after his admission, the miracle happened. He took a pencil and started to draw with a pencil. And he drew from morning to end.
Can I interrupt just for a second?
Pardon?
Would you mind moving your webcam? Could you move your webcam down a little bit? It's kind of aimed towards the ceiling. The other way. Yeah, right there. That's perfect.
Way?
Yeah,
okay.
That's good. Now we can see a little better.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Yep,
it's
you're
okay.
good now.
Good.
All right, thanks.
Where was I? Where was I? Oh yes, he took the pencil and started to draw. And that he did from morning to end every day, to evening every day, for 8 full years. I'm going to show you a picture. That was a picture he did with a pencil. So you see already he came to a mastery of drawing just with a simple plain pencil. 8 years after that, 8 years long, he did that. And then he turned to colors and started to work with crayons. Here, that was one of the very first pictures he did with crayons. So you see, he attained very quickly to a mastery of the use of colors even. This is called, if you can read it maybe, Felsenau-Bern. In the middle there is this writing, Felsenau-Bern, and that's a place. And you can recognize a chimney. That's a chimney of the factory there. It's very accurate. A whole series of details are perfectly accurate. The houses in front of the railway, and then the other railway going through the tunnel. All this is exactly how it is. He had an amazing memory of places. And you see also his wonderful use of colors. You see also that he fills the rest of the space with all sorts of symbols which are not easily understandable, but are typical of him already. And he won't change his symbols, like the star, like the cross, like these faces with shadowed eyes. Nobody knows why he did these shadowed eyes, but he sticks to that all the time. Another example is of his use of colors is this one, for instance. To his great fortune, his psychiatrist was a wonderful person. His name is Walter Morgenthaler. You may have heard of this name, who knows? But anyway, Morgenthaler was appreciative. He understood what he was doing, and he understood that was art. It wasn't just a hobby or a therapy, but he saw the artistic value of what he did, and he supported him, and he brought him paper and crayons regularly. So, and then, so Bernfree would work on and on and on, 7 days a week, only with breaks only on Sunday afternoons. That's all. And then he would work on and on. alone in his cell. Morgenthaler published a book about him called Madness and Art. This came out in 1921, and it was something completely new, especially for the German-speaking culture. There had been only one book before that, in the beginning of the century, by one French physician. So this book was no success at all. His colleague psychiatrists would just smile at him and think he was an eccentric. They didn't take it seriously. It was completely unscientific in their eyes, with a few exceptions, like Eugene Bleuler and Hans Prinzhorn. They were very interested. They got quite interested in this. At that time, Wölfli was 57 already, but there was a small circle, a little circle of initiated people in the clinic, personnel, nurses, some psychiatrists, and outside the clinic as well. A few visitors would come and buy a few pictures. By that time, Wölfli had calmed down, and he was quite pleased with the little fame he had gotten and the little pocket money he got as well. He died in 1930 at 66, leaving, now listen, 25,000 sheets of paper full of his stories. Oh yes, I forgot to tell you, he had started as well. After beginning with colors, he also started writing and composing music and making collage. And so when he died, he left 25,000 sheets of paper full of stories and music notations, and 1,460 drawings, and almost as many collages. So a huge, a prodigious production he had done. Now I'm going to show you a little bit what his main theme were in his pictures. He would talk in his pictures. Oh, now, yes, I wanted to show you, sure. That's him, 56 again, showing the heaps of sheets he had written in his cell. Here he is again at 61 with a trumpet made of a paper in his hand. And he would actually play his music, look at his drawing, like on the desk you see in front of him. He would look at his drawing and read the music, he would say, out of his drawing and play it. And actually there are some people who did play some music on the basis of his music. And if you go on the website and Google Adolf Wölfli in one word, .ch, you'll find there a few pieces of music. Quite nice. So that's one of the first pictures I want to show you about the themes. So one big theme is falling, the fall, and punishments and catastrophes, accidents, sins, crucifixions, executions, rapes, all of these. And also rescues, and sometimes being born again, and being helped by women. So this one, he said it was death fall of Saint Adolf. So you see, you would think it's a girl falling head down. For him, it was him. And a lot of times he would think of him or depict a child, actually. And I think that at this time, young boys would also wear skirts. So at least for him, it's clear, it's him falling down. And one thing I have to tell you about German, the German language, the fall in German has two meanings. Is for one, it's a fall, a symbol of a fall from heaven, from innocence, falling into hell, into sin, into evil. But it's also a case, like a judicial case. So I understand both meanings when you talk about falls.
Like the fall could be the case.
Mm-hmm. That's another fall. He just said it was fall, but actually you don't see any fall. No, nobody's falling here. Or maybe this little head and in the lower part is falling, could be. But what dominates actually the picture is something wonderfully harmonious, like a music key or a music instrument even. What else?
It's a kind of yin yang too.
Here, this one is called The Crucifixion of My Littleness. So you see a man being crucified with his shadow-eyed eyes, and you see full of symbols. They're not easy to understand, of course. In almost every single one of his drawings, you see these slugs, and also this kind of mice. So it's not clear. People have been wondering what it could be. And I do agree. I think also that it might have something to do with sexuality, these slugs and these kind of slimy things. But well, he never explained, of course. And he would also write in his free spaces in his drawing. So that's one crucifixion. There are many. This is the murder, and it's actually he calls it a murder of locksmith and plumber Albrecht Kindler, family father, for rape. The figure being murdered is on the left side. You see with his hanging head. And it's again full of symbols, all sorts. And this time there's music, see? Again, a crucifixion. This time it's a crucifixion of Holy Saint Adolf, on the harbor island of Vizcaya in the Pacific Ocean. Well, look at the picture first. You know, there's many things in this picture. There's huge amount of things. And of course, you don't have time to look into all details, but there's this crucifixion. There is a composition of the whole thing, absolutely fantastic composition. And above also these music notes, actually music notes all over. So you can imagine him playing his drawing, his crucifixion. So that's one thing he would, one big theme. Oh yes, I wanted to tell you now how he proceeded, how he would draw. That's also interesting. He would always start from the edges and draw very carefully the frame, as if he wanted to contain first whatever was going to spill out of him. He wanted to hold it, to contain it in a frame, and that was certainly wise of him, because then he would draw slowly towards, work his way through slowly and to the middle, towards the middle. He would never erase anything, never correct. He would say it was hard work, and that was not something he would be doing by his own will. He'd say it was being dictated to him. So here we have a clear example, really more than obvious than ever, of someone being guided by his soul. He would say himself, he wouldn't do it by his own will. So he was being guided by his soul, and finally being able to work through all these obsessions and ideas and memories and images, and finding to a whole harmonious and balanced by the end. Well, that's something like a little miracle in my eyes. And it would happen again and again, and he would have to. That's, as Mari was saying, he had no choice. He had to, every single day, to try and go work through his nights. Another theme was cities. He loved cities, and he had a very good memory of places. And this is a kind of a city, you know, fantasy city, as if it were like in space, something like that. And this city is nicely surrounded by a ring of music, if you can see. There's also writing. And what I didn't tell you yet is that once he was finished with shapes and colors, he would go on with writing, and sometimes with music, with notes of music. So he would really feel every single space of his pictures. So here he filled a lot with music. So there's music around this city all over. This is another place. He called it a lunatic asylum, psychiatric clinic, in other words, Bantine fantasy. So you see, I just love this picture because it's very special with these towers, and the play of colors is wonderful. My eyes. He liked buildings as well. Look at this. That's a staircase, and above the staircase there's an arch, and he called it Maria. Above the arch there is this little figure without a mustache. See, men are always with mustache. Women wear no mustache. That's the only thing which distinguishes men and women in his drawing. So there's Maria with, how do you call it? With child in the cradle above the exit arch of the staircase. That's the name, that's his title. And see, he filled the spaces, the free spaces, with writing this time. Railways is also something he liked a lot. So you see these curves of these railways, wonderful curves, these sweeping curves. If you look at it from a certain distance, and the play of colors, of course, wonderful. The blue is a river, there's a bridge, and I think there is a tunnel on the upper half left. The Great Railway of the Anger Trench, she called it. And the last theme I'd like to tell you about, show you, is very important. That's a serpent. You see, and it's him here, being held by a monstrous serpent with big mouth and pointed teeth. Quite a threatening thing. He said it was Sandora, giant serpent, and Saint Adolf II. And he would again draw himself like a girl wearing a skirt. So he is, in my eyes, it's clear he's being a child here. And the whole thing looks, to me, like a nightmare of a child. Another serpent coiled perfectly round, around male figure surmounted by a cross. This you'd have also, this is a symbol we'd see again and again and again. So there is religion somehow, or moral, or both. And these slugs are all over and the surroundings. Yes, another serpent here, coiled in two spirals, and inside of both spirals is an egg form, like egg shape, and embedded in the egg is, for one, on the left hand side is a woman, a face of a woman surmounted by a cross, and on the right hand side is the face of a man surmounted by a cross. So that's serpent. And you can imagine what a symbol of serpent might be. Of course, he didn't explain again, but serpent would well be sin, evil, temptation, and obviously also punishment. If you look at this big face again of the serpent with these pointed teeth. Another serpent, the last serpent I wanted to show you is this serpent with these powerful coils all over, all covered with music, and above, I think that's on the left hand side is the head of the serpent with this huge tongue hanging, and facing him is a person. It seems to be a woman, but the title he gave to this drawing is Saint Adolf, again, bitten in the leg by the serpent. So, I don't know. But anyway, to me, it has, again, a sexual connotation with this big tongue and these coils somehow. But, well, it's maybe my imagination. I find it a very beautiful drawing. So that's an overview of his main theme. And now we come to the most amazing pictures he made in my eyes. These pictures, well, this one you might argue it is not a mandala. To me, it's a way of representing a mandala. It's a perfectly symmetrical figure, drawn out of, again, his own unconscious material. You see on the left-hand side, it is a sexual scene, a man with a woman. It's clear. In the middle is, face and a clock. A clock would also be something quite important to him. Time, maybe also society, I don't know. And on the right-hand side, there is a woman with huge hands. Whether she's punishing someone, could be. And there's a man underneath. And then comes this one. To me, it's an absolutely masterpiece, a perfect mandala. He called it the Grand Hotel in Z. See. And this one will be the last one I wanted to show you. That's a city map of the beer, cookies, city, Saint Adolf, he called it. And to me, it's covered with music notes. And to me, this one, especially this one, is very, very forceful. And to me, I hear organ music when I see this picture. So it's really quite, yeah, I don't know how to say it. It's perfect. So you see, Adolf Wölfli was doing art as his only rescue. He had no choice, as I said. It was either creating daily or living as a living dead. So he was expressing all these agonizing, terrifying experiences of psychosis, these overwhelming contents, these memories, images, visions, and voices, and this feeling of having a dislocated, chaotic mind and multiple selves, all these experiences of psychosis, sexual impulses and expansion of body and mind, all of this. He managed to represent all this. And that was his art, which did not heal him. It did not heal him. And the wounds were obviously too deep and the guilt too great. But his art did enable him to survive these torments of his nights. And he did manage to translate all these torments and his anguish into wholes, into contained wholes, perfectly harmonious and balanced. He was able to contain and to endure the unrelenting pressure of his frantic mind. So although his works don't show an individuation, as we would call it, no psychic development, it does show some lessening of tension. Like this one last picture is a later one, 1917. He was 53 at the time. He was calming down, let's say. And for him, only his art could accomplish the miracle of bringing his soul back to him every single day, every single day. So now my second point is that his art was not only for him, was not only a potent therapy for him, which it was, but his art is now in the present tense a gift for us viewers today, as it used to be 100 years ago. Why? His art appears as timeless as any religious, just this one, if you look at this one, any religious iconography of any time and any culture. And 100 years later, we are as moved as his very first admirers, the few nurses and psychiatrists and a few other interested people. And this is, in my eyes, a paradox of authentic art. in a way, his drawings are very obscure, bizarre, and are totally self-centered and intimate even. And nevertheless, with this depth of intimacy, they do touch us very deeply. And it's not only our aesthetic sense, which is indeed impressed by the original composition and the use of colors he masters. If we take the trouble, of course, we have to take the trouble of looking more closely at these strange figures and symbols. And if we know a little bit about also his stories, the bits and pieces of his stories which appear, then our fascination grows and our heart is being touched by this willpower which was able to transform the torments into complete and balanced wholes. And we may be even surprised, one of us, or maybe at one picture only, or some of us won't. We may be surprised to feel very close to this longing we sense for beauty and relief and innocence and vastness. All this is somehow perceptible. And this experience of us, of a very diffuse emotional impact, strong, but not clear at all. We don't know exactly where it works on us and how and why. This experience, Jung called it numinous or archetypal. And he meant by that the power of this experience is beyond comprehension. In this sense, it's not scientific, certainly not. It reaches out to our sense, I'm trying to put it into words, a sense of an existential mystery somehow. And we may feel connected, not only deeply connected, not only to him, to Adolf Wölfli, in spite of his terrible life, but also to all humankind, and even maybe to the whole universe. Well, 20 years after his death, Adolf Wölfli was finally recognized, 20 years after his death, as a full-grown artist. This happened when Jean Dubuffet, a French painter, who after the World War II was looking for a raw sort of art, natural, absolutely authentic and instinctive. When he was in search of such a kind of art, you know, like searching for the wellspring of inspiration, and he discovered the works of Adolf Wölfli and of a few other mentally ill patients, and he started to collect these works. He understood them as art, and he collected these works. He was the one to coin the term art brut, A-R-T-B-R-U-T, art brut, which is often translated to outsider art. And he meant the art by people who are completely untrained, uneducated, and isolated from society. Don't have to be mentally ill. Many of them are, but not all at all in the collection that still exists, like in Lausanne. There's also a collection in the USA now. And Dubuffet was the one who made Wölfli known in the large public, and he considered Wölfli as the greatest artist of this kind of art artist. Now, to conclude, I would like to quote to you a few lines by a Swiss author whose name is also Adolf, Muschk this time. He's still alive, he's an actual writer. His lines sound like a Japanese haiku, and to me they render best this special feeling, which is so difficult to describe, conveyed by true art, as Jung would say. A feeling or a sense of another hardly palpable reality beyond the reality of our senses. And Muschk is certainly thinking as a writer, he's thinking of literature, but what he says surely applies to all art. He says, now we can start to read him, for the key to him is as lost as we are. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Lucienne. That was wonderful.
Welcome.
I really appreciate that, the images and all. What beautiful pieces. Murray, good. You've already pulled up your webcam. So if you want to introduce Linda, I think you're right, Murray. Why don't we go right into the next talk, and then we'll save a little bit of time at the end to do some questions with that. And just an announcement along those lines, go ahead and type out your questions. A few people have already done that. Feel free to type them out in the question dialog box, and we'll be collating those and asking as many as we can toward the end of it. So Murray, on to you, and then Linda. Okay, you should be unmuted, Murray. Sorry, I had you muted. Try now. Mm-hmm.
Lucienne, can you take your pictures off?
Yes.
PowerPoint? Okay.
I have taken it off.
Yeah, we'll get Linda to go ahead and do the intro, and no,
Okay.
you're fine. There you go. You're good.
There we go. That's good.
Okay.
And you can turn off your webcam too, Lucienne, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. But thank you, Lucienne. That was wonderful. And
Welcome.
what a great introduction to an artist that most of us have never heard of or know very little about, and so moving. And really makes the point, I think, that I was trying to make also in the introduction, that art comes from another source. And in this art brut, you really do see very clearly that these people aren't referring to artistic traditions or to what other people are doing. This is coming from another source altogether, and it has this very powerful, symbolic, numinous quality to it. You're absolutely spot on. Thank you. Now I'm going to introduce Linda Carter, who's going to do the next piece. Linda is very well known among Jungians who read the Journal of Analytical Psychology. She is the editor-in-chief, the United States editor-in-chief for the Journal of Analytical Psychology. She's also edited a book with her husband, Joe Cambry, on contemporary thinking in Jungian psychology. And in the last couple of years, she's taken a very strong interest in psychology and art, and has almost single-handedly, but with some help, of course, but really under her inspiration, put together two very large conferences, very successful conferences on Jungian psychology and the arts, one in San Francisco and the other one recently, just last summer, in New York. Now, Linda is going to give a paper that is clinical in nature, but really brings in the use of art in the clinical setting. So in a very unique way, in a very unusual way, I think, not as art therapy, but using art in a clinical setting to amplify a case and to move a case forward. So without anything further, Linda has a private practice in Boston. She travels a lot. She's in Europe a lot. We see her around here in Zurich quite often. So I'm very happy to have her on the program. Linda, do you want to turn on your webcam?
Okay.
We need Linda's voice.
Yeah, that's good. I think we.
Is it working?
There you go,
Okay.
Linda. Yeah, we can hear you. You're
Okay.
good.
Okay.
Perfect.
I'm going to move. Okay. So shall I begin?
Hi.
Yes, go ahead. You're looking
Okay.
great, and we have your slides
good.
here. Perfect.
Everything's working. Good. That's great news. Well, Murray, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And many thanks to you and Steve Buser for inviting me to participate in the Asheville seminars, and all of you who've worked on the Asheville project. Special thanks go to Ryan Deegan, who's been a very good consultant on technology, not my strong suit. So thank you, Ryan. And it was a great pleasure to hear Lucienne's work and her thinking. And I hope that, Lucienne, you and I can get together in a more relaxed setting and talk about our work and our interest in art and psyche. And as Murray said, I've had a special interest in art and psyche at the large group level for the last 8 years or so, producing conferences. And Our attempt with those conferences has really been to try to bring together members of the arts community with members of the psychotherapeutic community, or really anyone interested in depth psychology. And they've been very exciting and quite successful, and we're working on more going into the future. If you're interested in the Art and Psyche project, you can email me at the address listed here, and I'll put you on our mailing list. I can tell you more about Art and Psyche after this presentation, but what I'm really focusing on today is an individual case, which is quite different in some ways than the Art and Psyche project. I'd like to thank the patient who's given me her permission to talk about our clinical work together. And she has read the paper that I wrote for this presentation, and we've gone over it in some detail, and it's been kind of a retrospective of the last 2 years of our work together, and I think been quite meaningful for us both. That really kind of merits a paper in and of itself. So without further ado, I would like to go immediately into the case study and tell you about my first contact with Helena. That's the name I've given her. The phone rang on a hot summer day. On the other end of the line was Helena, who was calling while walking her 5-week-old baby on the boulevard, a local greenway in our small city. I could picture where she was. With the baby screaming in the background, she managed to tell me that she was struggling and wanted to be in therapy. She had heard about me 10 years ago from an old patient of mine whom she had met when they both were hospitalized for depression. She wanted something different. For 7 years, Helena had been engaged in cognitive behavioral therapy that was very helpful, but recently her much-loved therapist had moved to the West Coast. Really difficult timing around having this new baby and being on her own. The transference and countertransference began before we met in the consulting room. She must have had imaginings of me from what she had heard, and I was positively disposed, given my attachment to the patient who referred her. From the first session, it was clear that Helena was overwhelmed. The baby Tanya never stopped crying and didn't sleep. Helena was exhausted, depleted, and run down. Her husband James was loving and supportive, but only she could nurse the baby. The system was in crisis and in constant state of dysregulation. At every level, resources were limited. It seemed that the interventions were needed at multiple levels to steady the ship. Whoops, I'm not able to click to the next slide. Hello, can anyone help me with this? I'm stuck.
Hi, Linda.
What's up?
Joe, I'm stuck here.
Are the slides stuck, or the slides just won't move forward?
I can't.
The arrow button is what I usually use to move them.
Yeah, that's what I'm using.
And it's
I can't get the slides to move.
huh.
Stuck.
Worst case, you could get out of the program and kind of re-enter it.
And let's see here. Well, it's
Here.
There we go.
What happened?
you were stuck on this here. Anyway, you can use it. There you go.
Can I just do this? Okay, great, thank you.
All right, technical consultant. Thank you, whoever that was.
Little technical support from my husband, waiting in the wings. Thank God for him.
Thanks, Joe. Right.
Okay, so I'd like to, oops, I lost it again. Here we are. I'd like to talk a little bit about containment. In order to contain what was happening for Helena, we agreed to meet 3 to 4 times weekly, not so much for analysis per se, but for help and support with regulation. She and James came in about 5 times, not for couples therapy, but to try to strategize how to manage and support each other through this period of crisis. Eventually, I referred them to a couples therapist for treatment. Further, I suggested that they participate in a local crying clinic, whose goal is to help families with just their situation. With encouragement, she joined a mother's group, and she herself initiated contact with a lactation consultant. I was in action mode, trying to assist her in finding resources to help with this overwhelming situation. At another level, I heard a voice from long ago saying, "Mother, the mother." This was something I'd learned working in a therapeutic nursery 30 years before. I deeply believed that this was a fundamental truth. I could offer a mothering presence to Helena. From very early on in my mind, I saw images of the Leonardo Virgin and Child with St. Anne. This image was a powerful presence that accompanied each hour. I held back on talking about it or showing the picture to Helena. I needed time to metabolize and understand its significance for me and for the therapy. The image wafted through my mind like a thread of music. It was visceral, palpable, real, and alive. And what we could say, I need to move a screen here out of my way. Okay. The St. Anne image did not match her state of mind on entering treatment. And this is really important. I'll talk about this a little bit later. But for an amplification, I think, to work really well, there has to be a matching of the archetypal pattern with the psychological emotional state of the patient. And very important is matching of the affect. And at that point, she wasn't feeling the connection to St. Anne, the Mother of Mary. She was feeling bereft of that. So had I shown that particular image at the time, I don't think it would have been a good fit for what her psychological emotional experience was, and I don't think it would have been particularly helpful for her. I didn't think about all this at the time. It was much more intuitive that I held on it till much later in the treatment. So it was a compensation for what she was missing. It offered containment for me as I struggled to deal with her disorganization and distress. To have shown the image would have conveyed a failure on my part to understand the pain of what she was missing. Okay. I'm stuck again.
The slides won't advance again?
No.
So clicking, try double clicking. There's also an arrow I see at the lower left-hand corner of the slides that looks like this little arrow. There you go.
I'll just do it this way. This will work, right?
Okay.
This will work fine, Steve.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, Helena's moods were labile, shifting from one day to the next. She would feel fine and then abruptly shift into irritability, anger, depression, and anxiety. However, even from the early days of treatment, Helena was able to settle within the therapy hour. She could use the relationship to calm down and feel better. Beatrice Beebe's concept of mutual regulation was present and evident in noticeable decreases in anxiety, rate of speech, and general distress. She was able to come closer to my more regulated state of being. As you can see, I was attempting to weave a network that would hold Helena and her baby. She was my patient, but I was constantly aware of Tanya and her well-being, Tanya being her infant baby. Helping them develop a secure attachment was what I was hoping for, and it seemed that the best way to forge this connection was for Helena and I to develop our own significant attachment. Thoughts of earned secure attachment were in my mind. Given her history of trauma, I wondered if she had experienced an insecure attachment that could be moved toward an earned security. An earned security is a research term. Earned security is a research term that has evolved through the administration of the adult attachment interview. And this is when you look at earned security from a retrospective point of view. You can also look at earned security from a prospective point of view. But to do that, you need a lot of time and a lot of money. You have to administer the strange situation test, which designates attachment status, and then track those kids over time into early adulthood. So there aren't that many of those studies. And if we could do that, if we could rewind and give that strange test to Helena, we could track her over time and see the movement from an insecure attachment to possibly a more secure attachment. But of course, we didn't have that data. So in situations like this, you think about using a retrospective way of studying things. And the people who do that use the adult attachment interview. And the AAI was developed by George Kaplan in Maine in 1984 and is made up of 20 questions. It takes an hour to administer and responses are recorded verbatim. Both coherence and content are evaluated by trained coders of this standardized test. And this is the most important part in a way. It is used to describe a group of subjects who can speak coherently and collaboratively, but who describe their parents as unloving. So in other words, they can in terms of the process of speaking and organizing themselves, they can tell a coherent and logical story, but they speak of their parents in negative, unloving ways and with traumatic backgrounds and so forth. Their level of narrative coherence puts them in the secure autonomous group, but they differ in terms of deficits in the parental loving aspects of the AAI. Helena related well to me and could tell her stories of a traumatic early life with coherence and a sense of connectedness. Nevertheless, although she tended to compartmentalize painful memories and limit time spent discussing them, there was a natural affinity between us with an easy pattern of conversation. I found her bright, intelligent, motivated, curious, and thoughtful. She has good capacity for thinking psychologically, although reflecting through a depth perspective was new to her. She has had lots of questions about what I think, how I work, what methods I use, and so forth. Although I ask why she questions me at a given moment, I answer her. I feel that she needs grounding and a way to understand what is happening. Role models for how to be in a securely attached relationship with give and take seem to be quite limited. She needs to know how I think and how my mind works. I do not share personal history with her, but I do tell her about how I understand what is happening between us. It has been clear that she is working on developing what Fonagy calls theory of mind and mentalization. By exploring my mind, she is struggling to understand her own and to further develop reflective function. As I have come to know her family history and relationships with parents, it is clear that Helena suffered significant trauma throughout her childhood. For the first 6 years of her life, Helena and her parents lived in a communist-controlled Eastern European country where she lived in close proximity to her paternal grandparents and extended family. Resources were sparse, but she was part of a community where neighbors were friends and knew each other well. When the family moved to New England, her mother's birthplace, she lost the close connection with her grandmother, and she lost a sense of belonging that comes with community. They moved to an isolated area in northern New England where they had no social contacts or context or sense of belonging. Both parents worked and father's rages began. To this day, there are holes in the walls where he has thrown things. Helena was terrified of this behavior and frustrated that her mother did nothing to protect them. Her mother, whom I'll call Cecilia, began to drink and was affectively unavailable. Helena's mother herself had a significant history of traumatic loss. At 17, she watched her brother drown, and within a week, her mother, Helena's grandmother, suffered a fatal heart attack and died. In addition, Helena's mother had a first child born retarded, who was placed in an institution and died at age 10. Helena was born somewhere between 1 and 2 years following the birth of this impaired older brother. One wonders if Helena experienced her mother as a dead mother, to use Andre Green's terminology. One is also reminded of the replacement child concept first articulated by Kane and Kane in 1964, relating to parents' failure to mourn the death of one child before having another. And Christine Shalinsky is currently writing about the replacement child. Helena survived this difficult background through intelligence and capacity to do well in school. Teachers liked her and appreciated her significant talents and capabilities. Further, she was athletically inclined and showed an aptitude for acting. She got into an Ivy League school and left home. College was difficult for Helena. She suffered crippling depression and was hospitalized on several occasions. Eventually, she withdrew from school as going forward was not possible. Meeting James seems to have been a turning point for her. 10 years older, he was mature, established, and he thought she was wonderful. And she talks about James as he had his own apartment, real furniture, art on the walls, cooked meals, and had a salary while she was getting her clothes from the Salvation Army and riding a bicycle for transportation. They forged a substantial and loving relationship. Helena finished school, worked successfully for several years in sociology research, and then was accepted to graduate school on the encouragement of her employers. It seems that the relationship with James offered a platform from which she could launch into new aspects of her life. It was through the relationship with James that a door opened for a new kind of attachment. He was steady, faithful, and available, all welcome and new to Helena. They began to develop a secure base, a home, and a way of living. And that's one of Bowlby's basic ideas, that in order to explore the world, you need a secure base. So that through the relationship with James, she could finish up school, find a meaningful job, get herself into graduate school, and move forward with her life. And it's interesting that in studies with young children, if they're threatened or frightened by something, they will go past the frightening figure in order to get to the mother. So even though they're scared, they'll come close to something that's scary to get back to the secure base and feel okay. The history was reported in the middle of daily crises with sleeplessness, crying, and disruptions in the marriage. She was physically uncomfortable, her body hurt, and she related stories of the traumatic birth and cesarean section that was so unexpected. How could anyone understand what she had been going through? And now she had a screaming and demanding baby to care for, who was 5 weeks when therapy began. Leonardo's image persisted in my mind, along with the hope for movement from insecure to an earned secure attachment capacity. Theory and image emerged through interaction with Helena. As we found a rhythm and way of being together in the implicit domain, I had a sense that we were contained within a co-created archetypal atmosphere symbolized by the image of the Virgin and Child with St. Anne. There was something primal happening between us that was at the same time particular and unique to this new emerging relationship. I would come to realize that the St. Anne stimulated a hope for coherence that was much needed by Helena and by the two of us in the analytic dyad. And from here onwards, I will call these paintings the St. Anne paintings and pictures. And when you look at these paintings, you can see sort of nested systems with the baby Jesus, Mary, and her mother Anne. And this is, I think these are images of what I would call a secure, or Bowlby would call a secure base. Through my early experiences with Helena, I didn't realize that Leonardo had done a sketch called a cartoon, which you'll see on the left of the screen, and later a painting with the same name but different in some significant aspects. In my mind was Mary seated on the lap of St. Anne, caring for the baby Jesus. It had a sense of substantiality, support, presence. Perhaps I needed this image in the background in order to support Helena, who was on the front line with an upset baby. I researched the image and felt captivated by its profundity. It is primal, gripping, as it captures both the intensity of attachment and the struggle with separation. The cartoon is closer to the bone than the painting, which is more polished, more finished. Even in Leonardo's own time, this picture, or one similar to it, drew crowds of admirers over a 2-day period once it was finished. Why are some pictures masterpieces? George Hoganson answers this by talking about symbolic density. The word "the" is common and not symbolically dense, whereas the word mother is symbolically dense and is full of complex meaning. Similarly, the St. Anne pictures are quite dense and loaded with symbolic significance. The archetype of attachment and separation is fundamental for all. It is inescapable as a pivotal axis for life and relationship. This core dynamic configuration can be characterized through process and structure, both of which profoundly influence intrapsychic development and coherence, and interpersonal relationship systems throughout the lifespan. Research regarding security of attachment has helped us to appreciate the quality of interaction in adult psychotherapy. I'd just like to point out these pictures, we see attachment, but we also see the beginnings of separation. So we know from research by Beebe, Tronick, and other infant researchers that security of attachment at 4 months predicts security of attachment at a year. From Lyons, Ruth, and others, we know that security of attachment at a year predicts security of adult attachment. Internal working models are laid down early and affect the contours and quality of relationships going forward. Many of our patients have not had the substantial secure base that Leonardo so well conveys. Attachment is not a diagnosis, but a research description. We can imagine what a patient may have experienced, and we can reflect on the quality of the current attachment capacity. Understanding that there is a human inclination to repeat interactional patterns allows us to infer what may have happened historically. We can use attachment designations phenomenologically as a way to appreciate a patient's way of being with themselves and another in current circumstances. As a way to think about this case, and as a way to think about attachment in general, I suggest that we consider the St. Anne painting and cartoon as visual amplifications. The sculptural pyramidal shape of the figures conveys solidity and substantiality. Together, the figures form a triangular mountain, as you can see. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but and in the background you see mountains in the painting. The structure is created through the interweaving of bodies, and simultaneously we can observe dynamic process and movement. Jesus is embedded within a feminine Holy Trinity that is earthy, embodied, and planted in matter. It is the more accessible Humanisma Trinitas in contrast to the Divinisma Trinitas constituted by the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Touch and physical contact weave the figures together into a whole. Complex emotions are evoked as we watch St. Anne look at her daughter attend to Jesus, who moves out from his mother's grasp. He is held by her, but is moving toward John the Baptist in the cartoon and the Lamb in the painting. Both imply the future destiny of his passion, death, and resurrection, where he joins his Father in heaven. Mary is left to mourn the death of her beloved son, and one thinks here of Michelangelo's Pietà. In the cartoon, St. Anne points to heaven with her left hand, and again, I hope you can see the cursor here. With her left hand, reminding us that the Father may not be visible. Can you see it okay?
Yeah, the cursor comes across just fine, so feel free to use that.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. That's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
In the cartoon, St. Anne points to heaven with her left hand, reminding us that the Father may not be visible, but is eternally present. We're reminded here of the archetypal role of Father, who often leads the way to separation between mother and child. These symbols together convey the complexity of mutually influencing, nested systems, where separation and attachment play out side by side through body, affect, interaction, presence, and absence. From his prolific writing, we learn that Leonardo had an approach to sketches and drawings that we would today think of as working with the implicit domain, that which is known, felt, and experienced, usually outside conscious verbal interaction. Leonardo sketched in order to capture the psychological state and feeling tone of his work, and carefully followed up later with technical aspects of the construction. So let's see. This is a drawing, a preliminary drawing that Leonardo did before the Burlington House cartoon. And I have a quote here from Leonardo. Now, have you never thought about how poets compose their verse? They do not trouble to trace beautiful letters, nor do they mind crossing out several lines so as to make them better. So, painter, rough out the arrangement of the limbs of your figures, and first attend to the movements appropriate to the mental state of the creatures that make up your picture, rather than the beauty and perfection of their parts. Further, he says, sketch subject pictures quickly and do not give the limbs too much finish. Indicate their position, which you can then work out at your leisure. Notice in the cartoon that the hands and feet of the Virgin and St. Anne are not well articulated or specific. They are delineated in the more polished painting. However, in the cartoon and lead-up sketches, Leonardo successfully captures the mood arising from dynamic interplay of the characters. As onlookers, we engage with the artist in a symbolically dense network, layered with emotional, psychological, and religious significance. Leonardo explicitly and implicitly played with this complex archetypal constellation through multiple preliminary sketches that convey the fluidity of motion and willingness to experiment with material expression of his internal experiences. Sorry. One is reminded here of the analyst's state of reverie or evenly hovering attention, underscoring the importance of not foreclosing analytic experience with the fixity of premature interpretation. Play with image allows for dreaming the dream onward, and this comes with a more phenomenal and descriptive approach. Through these images, we are affected by the implicit domain and are brought into a moment of the transcendent function as we respond psychologically, physically, and emotionally to the visual network of a complex archetypal system. One sees a familiar image and is drawn in by the complexity of the interwoven relationships, and in a sense, we become part of the system depicted by virtue of our engagement with the gestalt and the particulars. We can zoom in for a closer look or move back in order to appreciate the whole, which is something that also happens in analysis. Just as Leonardo captured a sense of the implicit domain in painting, Virginia Woolf describes a parallel experience as she tells of her understanding of rhythm in poetry. In a letter to Vida Sackville West, dated 16 March 1926, she said, "Now this is profound what rhythm is, and goes far deeper than words. A signal, an emotion, creates this wave in the mind, long before it makes words to fit it. And in writing, such is my present belief, one has to recapture this and set this working, which has apparently nothing to do with words, and then as it breaks and tumbles in the mind, it makes words to fit it." Leonardo's play with sketching seems to be his method for capturing what we would call a kind of implicit knowing. Language and interpretation are not required for an implicit understanding by the artist or the viewer. We come to semantic reflection secondarily to one's initial visceral response. This is similar to Leonardo's approach to sketching, whereby he captures a feeling through making an image and follows up with the technical know-how required for the finished work. He was both an artist and an engineer. We could say that part of the appeal of the St. Anne pictures has to do with their trans-historical nature, but Leonardo was a man of his particular time and culture who had many influences. And this section is actually, I've been influenced about the art historical part by my next door neighbor, who's actually a professor at the Rhode Island School of Design. And she sees Jung as an essentialist and is bothered by the way sometimes that we approach things, and feels strongly that we also need to look at the context in which a painting is done. So born of a notary father and a young peasant woman named Caterina, Leonardo lived with his biological mother for the first 5 years of his life. He then joined his father's household with grandparents, an uncle, and father's young wife, hence the idea that he had two mothers. At age 14 in 1466, he joined Verrocchio's studio and there developed many skills before leaving in 1478. He became the archetypal Renaissance man, a scientist, inventor, engineer, artist, sculptor, and polymath. Leonardo lived in a time when the cult of St. Anne as the Mother of Mary was prevalent. The culmination of interest in St. Anne hit a peak between 1485 and 1510, when her popularity rivaled that of her daughter Mary. St. Anne was known as the protector of pregnant women and the patron of the family at a time when families were extraordinarily large, with as many as 20 children. Further, she was a model of fertility, marrying 3 times. One can imagine the importance of the comforting presence of St. Anne with what must have been a high prevalence of child mortality and maternal death with childbirth at that time. Indeed, the theme of the Virgin and Child with St. Anne was popular during the Renaissance, as evident in 2 paintings, one by Masaccio and Masolino, and the other by Dürer. So this is Masaccio and Masolino. You see Anne in the background, Mary, baby Jesus, very different feel from the Leonardo. And this is done by Dürer. Again, Mary, Anne, and the baby Jesus. And of course, Dürer was the leader of the Northern Renaissance, while Leonardo was kind of seen as the leader of the Southern Renaissance painting. As is well known, Freud took a special interest in the St. Anne painting at the Louvre and wrote a small book called A Childhood Reminiscence of Leonardo da Vinci, using it as a means to analyze Leonardo. He did make cultural historical leaps, but evaluated the painting in relation to what he imagined to be Leonardo's personal psychology. Freud saw in the drapery of the skirts of Anne and Mary, and I think you should be able to see that in the white outlining. Freud saw in the drapery of the skirts of Anne and Mary a vulture. This observation he associated with a childhood description by Leonardo of being attacked in infancy by a vulture. He connected the bird image with the Egyptian goddess Mut, who had a vulture's head. He argued that the Renaissance Italians would have had access to Egyptian texts through Hor Apollo, and that they believed the vulture to exist only in the female sex fertilized by the wind. Further, Freud associated Mut with the German Mutter, with mother. He saw Leonardo as passively homosexual, and that Mary and Anne represented the 2 mothers who raised him, his biological mother and his father's young wife. Freud assumed that in the painting, Leonardo was remembering these 2 personal mothers. In 1923, Eric McLaughlin wrote a letter to the editor called Leonardo in the Consulting Room, and proclaimed that Freud's theory that the bird who inserted its tail in Leonardo's mouth was not a vulture but a kite, a very different bird, thus dispelling Freud's string of associations to Egyptian hieroglyphs, virgin verse by the wind, and so forth. The confusion was caused by a mistranslation. This would seem to be an amplification gone awry. So Jung made the following comments in response to Freud's book. He says, interwoven with the apparently personal psychology, there is an interpersonal motif known to us from other fields. This is the motif of the dual mother, an archetype to be found in many variants in the field of mythology and comparative religion, and forming the basis of numerous collective representations. Jung argues that Leonardo was in all probability representing the mythological dual mother motif, by no means his own personal prehistory. Further, he asks, what about all the other artists who painted the same theme? Surely not all of them had two mothers. Jung argues that Leonardo was in all probability representing the mythological dual mother. I've just said that. Okay. Returning to Leonardo's work, I would like to call attention to a subtle method of painting called sfumato, as it affects how we engage with his art outside conscious awareness. Sfumato comes from the Italian sfumare, meaning to tone down or to evaporate like smoke. In painting and drawing, it has to do with the fine shading that produces soft, imperceptible transitions between colors and tones. Gombrich notes that sfumato is Leonardo's famous invention, the blurred outline and mellowed colors that allow one form to merge with another and always leave the viewer something to our imagination. According to Alexander Nagel, sfumato describes not merely the appearance of smoke, but its disappearance, its imperceptible diffusion in the atmosphere. This invention also had to do with the application of translucent glazes in delicate films no more than the thickness of a red blood cell, probably with his finger. That comes from Scientific American last year. With 30 of these films stacked one on the other, he softened lines and color gradations until it seemed as if the entire composition lay behind a veil of smoke. This refined method of transition from light to dark or dark to light engages our imagination and reminds us again of the liminal states well known to us in the practice of analysis. There is a holding together of the opposites with an almost imperceptible transition. This method may account for the minute yet powerful expression of Mona Lisa's smile that could be likened to the capturing of a slight facial expression that implicitly registers and has an effect, but is only consciously visible through a frame of microprocessed videotape such as the infant researchers use. Through content, form, fluidity of movement, color, and refined technique, the Virgin and Child with St. Anne pictures came to symbolize for me the archetypal foundation of the therapeutic relationship as it emerged with Helena. This image entered my conscious awareness as a co-creation that floated through the therapeutic atmosphere of this particular relationship, giving form and shape to unconscious and non-conscious interactions. I didn't specifically talk about the pictures until 6 months into the treatment, at a moment when Helena and I were feeling especially connected. In retrospect, I realized that I was waiting for her to feel a sense of attachment between us before talking about the St. Anne pictures. Otherwise, it could not have had an affective influence on her, or could even have felt foreign and alienating. For a successful amplification, the image must match the archetypal pattern present in the dyad at a given moment, and there must necessarily be an affective match with the story or image and an affective match in the therapeutic relationship. With such multimodal engagement comes a sense of cohesion in the moment that leads to coherency of self over time. We could liken this process to a kind of multimodal matching seen in infant research. I was matching an unspoken state of being in a co-created atmosphere to an image that I felt carried a similar emotional valency. One is reminded here of the subtle atmosphere and liminality created between darkness and light with sfumato. I could see that this visual amplification had landed with a slight smile on Helena's face, but not unlike that of the Mona Lisa. She was immediately curious and wanted to see the picture, which I showed her in the following session. The use of myth, story, and imagery opened possibilities for metaphoric, nonlinear, ambiguous play in a space in between. Moving from the personal to the collective is a move from another layer of the mutually influencing system. When intersubjective matching is activated in the co-constructed dyad, and there is a true sense of affective resonance, this is critical, The vibration reaches to and is felt at the archetypal level. The image that evolves in between represents a synthesis of the interaction of two minds, two bodies, two psyches meeting consciously, unconsciously, and non-consciously in a dyadic state of consciousness, a moment of meeting, or as the transcendent function. We struggle to find words to describe the experience. Perhaps that is why the indirectness of metaphor is so valuable. Metaphor presents in pictures, possibilities, undefined images, and allows the mystery of the unknown. Amplification, when used well, is an art in itself. It is not necessarily employed with explicit intentionality, but instead an emergent phenomenon that captures the essence of the psychological constellation. So for me, using an amplification doesn't come because I'm listening to a patient and I try to think, well, what mythological story would match their experience? It's more about analytic reverie of sitting and waiting to see what comes to me, and then thinking about whether or not to share that with the patient. And I would call that an emergent phenomenon. It connects the personal and the archetypal and should be presented tentatively as an option, a possibility to be entertained, something to be played with. With careful attention to the analysis of explicit and implicit responses, engagement in metaphorical language and image has the potential to connect body and mind within the containing relationship. Play with metaphor has an organizing effect and can regulate the two hemispheres of the brain, as has been noted by Dan Siegel. This is particularly important for patients who are survivors of trauma. My hope for the therapy with Helena, herself a survivor of early relational trauma, was that we could move toward earned security, a research term that seemed to me to have significant clinical implications. Attachment designation is based on proximity seeking when someone is under threat. After age 6, Helena no longer could turn to reliable, loving others for support. My relationship with her has benefited from her history of positive relationships with her grandmother, teachers, and her 7-year therapy with Dr. S., in addition to the marriage with James. Through stories of these supportive relationships, we can see a pattern emerging in her constructive use of caring others. This bodes well for the current therapy and for her development of earned security. The move toward me as a safe haven began early in the therapy when Helena would become extremely dysregulated with volatile emotional surges and angry behavior toward James. She would leave the house, sometimes with the baby, and call me. In retrospect, she believes these phone conversations and availability laid the groundwork for a substantial, trusting relationship between us. She could experience a secure base in the midst of terrifying fears and feelings. Through conversation and the archetypal presence of the holding symbolized by St. Anne, she could settle and return home because the screaming baby inside herself had found a place to land. It seems to me that the content of what I said was not as important as my consistent presence in the implicit domain. The hope was that my ability to tolerate her screaming baby self, she could learn to cope and regulate Tanya, her baby. If so, the system could then move from fragmentation to cohesion in the moment and coherency over time. Recently, when anticipating a visit from her mother, who would be in the area for business, Helena said, "I can't believe that she is my mother." Helena has spent years tending to her mother's demands and needs and has been left motherless without a lap to sit upon and without much needed containment. A failure of recognition has emerged between them. Recognition of oneself and the other is central for life and a central concept for the grandfather of American infant research, Louis Sander, who was a member of the Boston Change Process Study Group until he died recently. Recognition leads to coherency within the self and within the relational system. In their recent book, the Boston Change Process Study Group quotes Sander as follows: "Emphasizing multiple interrelated levels of organization leads Sander to the potential tension inherent in needing to organize at the dyadic level of being together, as well as the level of individual psychological organization or being separate. In Sander's writings, the recognition process is the device that bridges these levels. Sander locates this recognition process at the heart of the continual, self-initiated exchanges that occur between any organism and its context of environment of support. It has been important for Helena that I recognize not just her trauma, despair, and depression, all of which caused her great shame. She has needed me to see the alive, creative aspects of herself and her being. An interesting pattern has emerged between us that I would like to describe. At times when Helena has been in a very dark place, tearfully describing painful childhood memories, she will look down, stop, then look up and ask me something about art or literature. I ask her about the surprising switch, and she makes it clear that what she is talking about is just too painful. Clearly, she needs a reprieve. On one occasion, she asked me if I had seen a show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York called The Steins Collect. I responded that I had, and a very animated conversation ensued. As part of the exhibit, the interior of the Steins salon with all of its artwork was projected onto 3 walls, giving the feeling of going back in time to see how the art was actually hung. I commented that it was as if we had gone to the museum together through the course of our conversation. With the transition, we had entered another room, another kind of imaginal domain, and a way of being together. Helena smiled in agreement. There was a moment of shared pleasure, recognition of each other through the medium of the artwork. We could say that the shift was defensive, but that it is also true that it may have been appropriately defensive, and that she and I both need to help her protect against becoming re-traumatized by overwhelming memories and affects. Most importantly, she could see herself in another light by watching me see her in this creative space between us. She could see me recognize healthy aspects of herself. Thoughts of the building of reflective function come to mind here. Also, through change in topic, the system moved to a more regulated state and managed to stay within the window of tolerance developed by Siegel and Pat Ogden. The St. Anne image emerged in the context of this particular relationship at a given moment in time. The fabric of the attachment has been woven with moments of meeting, including disruption and repair. The Boston Change Process Group note that a moment of meeting occurs when the dual goals of complementary fitted actions and intersubjective recognition are suddenly realized. The subtlety of the implicit domain that is primarily nonverbal has been balanced by more language-based interpretation, but like Leonardo's method of sketching, we need to fully experience the creative process affectively before technique or words can be found to fit it, as Virginia Woolf has noted in her understanding of rhythm. Visual metaphor and use of amplification created an ambiance and atmosphere that allowed for experience of both archetypal processing and structure, where there was room for the fluidity of exchange and the reliability of continuity. Helena and I continue on with connection, disruption, and repair. We speak of trauma and art, her outer relationships, and her internal experience. And together we both tend the transference-countertransference relationship, along with here and now emerging new and creative ways of being together. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Linda. Really appreciate that. Some really nice presentations today, just outstanding. What I'd like to do now is, Murray's already done it, open up the webcams for our panelists. So Lucienne, if you're still there, go ahead and turn on your turn on your webcam too. And I'm going to unmute you, Lucienne. Okay. And what I thought we'd do, I know we're close to closing time. If people are okay, actually let me open my webcam too. We may go ahead and go a little bit longer, maybe another 15 minutes or so, to allow people some time for questions and answers. If anybody needs to leave, including the panelists, feel free. If you have an appointment you need to get going to, just say goodbye to us when you do, and then you can get going. Otherwise, maybe we'll just do another 15 minutes or so with that. There are a number of email questions. I'll read those in a moment when we have a chance. I might open up the microphone in Asheville. Before I do so, any comments from the panelists today before we shift to the question phase? Mm-hmm.
I think we should give the questioners some time to.
Yes. Well said. You guys have had enough time to talk. Okay. Let me read 2 of the questions, and then we'll see. We have a live audience here in Asheville, and there's about 25 to 30 people in our little office, and we'll see if there's any questions there in a moment too. First question I jotted down is for Lucienne, who just walked out. There she is. Okay.
Yeah.
And the question is, I noticed several images that look like vaginas. I wonder if his attempt to molest young girls was a desire to find something in their vaginas. That was from Kathleen Berry. You want me to reread that, or did you hear the question fully?
I did hear it.
Okay.
I've never thought of it, but of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Why not? Yeah. I think you said something like he would like to find something in the vagina. Did I hear it well?
That was the comment that the listener saw
Yes.
the images that looked like vaginas, and
Yeah.
was the molestation of the young girls that he kept falling into a symbolic looking for something within the genitalia.
Good. Yeah, I think it's a good observation. Yeah. And he might, to me, he was dominated. Well, he had a very strong mother complex and quite a positive one. And he was one of his big forces from the unconscious and in his psyche was this nostalgia, this sadness towards losing the mother and whatever that all might have been. And there's an echo. Sorry.
It's not too bad.
And okay, and my spontaneous association when I heard now your question would be that he might very well have searched for the mother, as paradoxical it sounds, of course, because he was approaching young girls. But this approaching young girls might have to do with his massive social problems. And he was like regressing in my eyes. That was all. But yeah, looking for the mother everywhere in any female appearances, that might very well be. And this, I haven't thought of it, but it's a good observation.
Yeah, thank you. Well, one other point, Mariana Tauber, I believe, is with us today, although I don't see her on the attendee list. She's written a book called Soul's Ministration, an Imaginal Journey through Crises. So if you're there, Marianne, click your raise your hand button. So I wanted to give you a chance to add something a little bit later as well. That's just an aside, Marianne, if you're out there, give us a note of what your screen name is. I don't see it there. And also the second question I've got is from Sheila, and it says, has anyone looked at this is Wolfie again, looked at his work as prenatal psychology? So it's not prenatal psychology, meaning, I guess, connecting with the child before birth, in essence, mother to child. And Linda, I guess that really fits with some of your work as well. But any connections with prenatal psychology? I guess bonding with a baby.
I have nothing to say to that. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
I wouldn't know. Maybe Linda, do you have an idea?
Well, I was just thinking about that. I mean, in some ways, you could actually imagine Wolfley as having a disorganized attachment from early on. So before he was separated from his mother at 8, he probably was pretty traumatized by his alcoholic father and difficult circumstances and so forth. So, and that would fit with his difficulty of keeping himself together and being in relationships with other people. Going back to prenatal life, that's a really interesting question. There's a lot of research being done now on the effects of maternal stress on fetal development and so forth, and what that means psychologically and emotionally. It's very difficult to study that, but people are working on it.
I'd like to ask that question. What made her ask that question? What does she see in the painting that seems?
Yeah, that's a great thought.
Yeah.
So Sheila, if you can, raise your hand. Click the raise your hand button, and if you like, I'll open up your microphone and you can ask us that. So Sheila, let me go to that screen. If you're willing, you don't have to. If you're not wanting to do this, so that's fine. That goes for any other listeners as well. If you would like to ask a verbal question of our panelists, just click the raise your hand button, and I'll be scanning through that, and we'll let you know. Let me go through the questions too. Maybe they've written back. Sheila says fabulous! Exclamation mark. So she likes the thoughts so far. And then what else is there? Oh, here we go. It could also be birth memory, to find something or a way through the vagina. I guess that's back to the other question.
Yeah.
Sheila says, I'd love to, but it can't open, so she can't open up her microphone right now. So, okay.
That's interesting.
So if she can type in more if she'd like later on, and if we get a chance, we'll ask that as well. Meanwhile, anybody else with questions, type them in, or click the raise your hand button, and if you're brave, we'll open up your microphone. I'm going to shift to our studio audience here in Asheville. And so, Len, I'm going to open up the microphone there, and let's see if there's any questions there. Take me a moment to to do so. Oh, good. You've already done that. Great. And is your microphone unmuted? It should be now. Okay. Go ahead. Any questions from Asheville? Go ahead. Any questions from Asheville?
I think this would be for Linda Carter. You spoke so much about the pre-verbal nature of your work with your analysis and how the affect had to be embodied. And I heard a lot of sympathetic language around, you know, waiting for the metaphor and for the artistic expression to arise in her. The one thing I'd like to hear a little more from you about is just how you work with the embodiment itself, and if you do something to bring attention to your client, to Helena, about where she feels this in her body and how you work with that.
Yeah, I do just that. I mean, if I pick up something, she has a very mobile and expressive face, so a lot happens when I look at her. And at times I will stop her and I'll say, something just went across your face. I'm wondering what's happening inside you and where you feel it in your body. I do talk with her about that. But I'm very interested in the implicit domain, which is the nonverbal domain of interaction in analysis. And it's usually out of awareness, but I've become much more aware of that as time has gone by. I'm aware of my own body movement, her body movement, voice tone, intonation, facial expression, and so forth. So I pay very close attention to those things. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure I heard all of it. Okay? Okay.
Steve, I have a question.
Yep, go ahead.
This is for all the panelists.
Yep, go ahead.
This is for all the panelists, but it really arose from your introduction. I was struck by the dramatic difference in the way you characterized Jung's perception of libidinal energy as being perhaps excessive and needing expression, as being the source of culture, whereas with Freud, at least in Civilization and its Discontent, he sort of puts forth that libidinal energy needs to be contained, almost, you know, tamed like a wild beast, and that culture arises from that. Might you comment on that?
Sure. Jung uses this very intriguing term, surplus of energy, in his essay on psychic energy. And his view is that even if you gratified all of your instincts, your biological instincts for food, sex, whatever else it might be, completely, 100%, even 110%, there's still a surplus. Mm-hmm. And that leftover surplus is something that isn't going to be satisfied or taken up or absorbed by expending it in one of these other directions. And out of that surplus, you get a kind of discontent, you could say. I mean, it's another way of looking at civilization as discontent. We are all discontented. Nobody is satisfied. And out of that dissatisfaction, we create. It's like an itch that you have to scratch, or a pressure. Now, Freud talked a lot about sexual pressures, releasing sexual pressures, the need to sublimate the sexual pressures. He's talking about libido too, and a surplus of libido. It's like one of my professors said, the human being is a creature with infinite wishes and finite capacities to fulfill them. And these, the part of us that is connected to this surplus, or this infinite longing, does get channeled by artists into their activities. I mean, you look at Wolfley, he had a lot of surplus libido sitting in his cell. There weren't many places to go with it. And his artistic work absorbed it all. He worked 6.5 days a week for years and produced all of this work. So, you know, he was stuck with a situation where he had to use surplus energy plus. But suppose he'd been a normal man, would he have still created art? Suppose he'd lived a conventional life, he'd gotten married, he'd had 7 children, he'd had a loving wife. Would he still have had a desire to create art? I think he would. That's just my intuition, my assumption, that artists who are very successful sexually still create a lot of art. Look at Picasso. I mean, he had lots of, and he made thousands of works of art. Why? It wasn't just for commercial reasons. It's like he had to create. So that's the kind of discontent that I think culture is made. Freud was right in a sense that there is discontent, but it's a different way of looking at it. And why the human being has this surplus of libido, we don't know. Animals don't seem to. If they eat and have enough, they sleep. If they have sex, they're done with it until the next time they're in the mood, and so on. But we human beings have this strange capacity for too muchness of everything. And so channeling that into art is a way of containing it, also expressing it, and it's as though something wants to get expressed through us. That seems to be Jung's theory about art. The art creates the artist. There is something that wants to come pushing through. And of course, the quality of the artwork varies considerably, and her preferences for it. I love that painting of Leonardo, and all of his paintings, his skill and his technique. But what Jung is suggesting is that he's also showing us archetypal motifs, the dual mother theme, or the Mona Lisa, the anima, this mysterious woman. I remember going to the Louvre one time and walking past the Mona Lisa and watching her watch me. Her eyes follow as you go past. And I couldn't believe how alive she was. It's totally different from seeing her in reproduction in books. You go and look at her and she is right there. I mean, he had incredible capacity to create these living images, and they speak to us deeply. That's what Lucian was saying. And Linda was saying that the same thing, they get into you and they give you metaphors to work with, they transform you. Human beings need art to live by and to grow with, and to grow into. And that's the gift of our culture. It's a tremendous asset. Maybe we don't know how to use it as well as we should.
Well, thank you. I've noticed, Sheila, I tried to open up your microphone. Are you able to ask the question directly? Let's give that a shot if you're available. So Sheila, I think we just opened the microphone, if that's working. Can you hear us? And not yet. I'll keep it unmuted, but if you're able to jump in at some point, go ahead. And there was also a question from Clint. So Clint Burhans, I'm going to open up your microphone as well.
All right.
A little bit of people. Can you hear us?
Yes,
go ahead.
can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so for Lucienne most, and thank you all for a fantastic seminar. In Wolfie, how do you, Wolfie?
Wolfley, yeah.
Wolfley, I'm from the Midwest, you know, just outside of the remains of Detroit. So it seems like the gates to the unconscious were burst open to a stream of unconscious energies to an extreme degree, even more than, like, say, William Blake. And both of them were very talented in multiple arts. Has anybody tried to decipher or reconstruct the writings, or perhaps even put together and try to play the music in those drawings?
Thank you for asking the question. That's very interesting. I decided to dwell on the drawing because there was just too much material here. The problem, first thing with his writing, is that he writes in an old Gothic writing, which I can hardly read. You know, that's the writing people had 150 years ago, and it's changed completely now. But there are people who have tried, and who has transposed his writing. Surely there are books about him. And so it's, but then his writing is like, I don't know whether you have ever read some works by schizophrenics. It is really a lot of play with words, sometimes very witty and sometimes very bizarre. And he would play with words endlessly. He would, endlessly, sorry. He would sometimes align also numbers, on and on and on and on. He would invent words for huge numbers, this kind of thing. And then concerning his music, there are people now who have tried to play his music, some. And if you go on Google, you Google his name, Adolf Wölfli is in one word, .ch. You will find a few pieces of music. It's quite nice.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. We're close to the time to close. Ryan, I've lost my ability to see the questions. I think somehow that panel dropped out of my my desktop. Were there any last quick ones, Ryan, that you saw in the questions that we should ask? Did Sheila or Marianne and Tower, either one, kind of get back to us, or not?
We didn't hear back from Marianne. I'm not sure she's on the presentation with us. I did email you a few questions, and if you're able to, click on the View button, the View tab, Steve, at the top, and you can get to the questions from that.
Yeah, it is gone. I've done that a few times. But that's okay. We're almost out of time anyway. There was one question for Linda. I can't find it now, about the therapeutic field. Do you remember that one? Can you get to that one? And if so, we'll close with that one. If not, we'll just say a friendly goodbye to everybody. Do you remember that one?
I could just mention that Linda has written a chapter for this book.
I don't remember that one, Steve.
All right, it's this guy. Go ahead, Murray. That's a wonderful book. I have that book. It's one of my favorites. Go ahead and hold that up again. And
intersubjectivity. And she gives a wonderful example of a moment of meeting in there where she uses a fairy tale. And I think she's a specialist on moments of meeting, because that is so moving, that page and a half. I've used it in several seminars and classes. I'll read it. And this extraordinary ability that you have, Linda, to find exactly the right moment to share an amplification that turns into an experience, a shared experience of a very profound emotional nature. So
thank you, Murray.
Thank you for another
pleasure.
Yeah,
presentation.
we do want to thank you, Linda, for sharing such a personal and in-depth view of working with analysand and how that blends into the transference, countertransference, and the therapeutic alliance and the artistic imagery. And that's such an honor when somebody opens up their consulting room in that way as well. So thank you so much for that. Thank you, Lucianne. You did a marvelous job with Wolfley, and thank you, Murray, as well, for just your great overview. We'll be closing in just a moment. I want to honor the time commitment, because I know we've gone a little bit over, and that's indicative of how much interest there was out there and the great material that everybody had with that. There were a number of questions we couldn't answer. Partly I lost that screen, but also, even though I had it, we were kind of out of time, so we'll kind of hold off for that. But I want to thank the audience for all the wonderful participation and engagement. Had a nice turnout today, and we really appreciate that. Remember, September, we'll be looking at the afterlife with John Hill and Murray Stein. I think that'll be a very interesting piece, and we'll make sure to send out announcements for that. And please do give us feedback. You'll get a link to a survey relatively soon. And if you can just give us and our presenters some feedback how things went, see what went well, what could we do better, and that's always very much appreciated to have that. So thank you, all our presenters. We really appreciate it. I give you a round of applause, but we can't open all the microphones, so just know that we all appreciate it nonetheless.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for today.
Well,
So with that, yep. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Good.
Yep. Bye, everybody. We'll sign off.
goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.